welcome to Rouse Rising. If you are a new face around here, my name is Katie, and today I am sharing with you our homestead meals made from scratch, from our pantry to yours. And today I've got a variety of meals that I'm sharing with you. We're trying something new, and I'm going over sourdough. I've had a lot of questions about sourdough. Today I'm going to dispel some of the myths about sourdough, and I'm also going to show you how forgiving sourdough is, because I neglect it when I make it and it still turns out beautiful. So I'm going to share that with you. I'm going to share the process of making the dough and the meals that go on around the dough making and all that stuff. So I hope that you can learn a little bit about sourdough in this video, as well as get some meal inspiration. We are still doing the 3 Rivers Challenge. We are in February now, and I am really minimizing what I'm buying at the grocery store. I'm not stocking up right now. I am just buying what we need. So today I went and I got 3 gallons of milk, and I got 3 18 packs of eggs. And I'd share a grocery haul with you, but that's pretty boring, so I'm not going to share that with you. But just keep in mind, all that we've really been buying is milk and eggs from the grocery store, occasionally some bananas, but we have frozen fruit, frozen vegetables, and freezers full of meat that we're trying to work through, as well as pantry items. So I'm just trying to move through some of the food and not be a food hoarder. That's the key. We don't want to hoard food. We don't want food going to waste. So that's why we're doing the pantry challenge for January and February. I thought I was going to stop in February, but with sickness in the house and me not feeling well, it just made sense to buckle down, stay at home, and keep the pantry challenge alive through February. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, that's a thumbs up, and leave a comment down below. I love talking with y'all. I love chatting down in the comments, and let's jump right into this video. All right, so Aaron and I eat super simple. I'll go into more detail on another vlog, but my dinner tonight is eggs. I'll have these eggs. I'll probably have a banana. I might have some frozen fruit, but this is life on elimination animal-based diet. It's really simple. So we have simple food: eggs, meat, fruit. That's it. We're eliminating inflammation in our life because we suffer daily from chronic conditions, and a carnivore-based diet is what helps us feel the best.
All right, we are going to start this week's meals out with a stir-fry type meal. We're going to make like an elk stir-fry tonight. So I'm starting out measuring my 2 cups of rice, and I'm going to rinse this rice really well. You always want to make sure that you are washing your rice, and I just learned that I should be washing my oats and other grain products as well. I did not know that. I always just dumped my oats directly into the pot, but now I know I need to wash them before or rinse them. Okay, we're going in these 2 cups of rice with 2 cups of broth, and then we're going to add in a can of coconut cream and some of the coconut milk water that's in the bottom of the can as well. And then the Instant Pot is really awesome because all you have to do is put your ingredients in and hit the rice function. So that takes the guesswork out of it. I can set it and forget it and start the rest of my meal, and I don't have to worry about my rice boiling over because this is going to take care of cooking it perfectly. So I head over to the stove while my rice is cooking, and I'm going to put some lard in my cast iron pan. Now, before you guys ask me for a link to my cast iron pan, I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't have one because this cast iron pan belonged to my mother. It is very old, and it's very smooth. But I will say, if you buy a Lodge cast iron pan, there is a way to get it smooth. You just use some sandpaper, and there's a method to the madness. So I apologize I don't have that for you. But I start this meal out with a blend of peppers and onions that were frozen in my freezer. And I'm going in with a can of chili garlic elk meat that I canned up last year. So I'm just allowing everything to get cooked up, and then I am adding, it's producing its own juices. So then I add some cornstarch and water, and now I'm adding some of the chili garlic elk reserve broth to this. And the cornstarch and water mixture just thickened this up and made it have a really nice sauce that's going to give so much flavor to this meal, and it's going to make it so yummy when we serve it with rice. So for my children, I don't put the food on top of the rice or the main dish on top of the rice. I put it on this side because they can be a little picky about things and they don't want things either touching, or they don't want, I don't know. Kids are funny. So I just serve this up on the side of the rice, and then it's up to them if they want to mix it or sop up the thick gravy with their rice. So this is what the kids had for dinner. And then Aaron and I, you can see back there's 2 more jars of elk meat. So we just took the meat out of those jars. I had mine with some of the rice because on my particular elimination diet, I still eat rice, I still eat sourdough bread, I still have potatoes, and I eat a lot of meat and eggs and things like that, and fruit. And so the kids, they still eat things like they can have this. It has the cornstarch, the peppers, things that I don't eat. So they're having that. And then Aaron and I are just going to have plain meat, which I don't share with you. It's kind of boring. It's just meat and rice. And then we had a smoothie. And I've shared with you guys before, we do the same basic smoothie every time. Okay, so now we're going into the evening, after dinner, and I need to get all of my sourdough ready because I'm going to have the next couple of days I'm dedicating to sourdough bread baking. Today, I want to share with you how sourdough is forgiving. And I also want to talk about some misconceptions that we have about sourdough, mainly that you have to feed the starter and discard every day. You don't have to do that. You can feed your starter, leave it out on the counter for a few hours, and then refrigerate it overnight or until you need to use it again. And so that's what I have done. I've pulled my starter directly out of the refrigerator and I've added it to my bowl here. And what I am doing is making my leaven for my bread tomorrow. I'm going to make 6 total loaves. So you see me doing 2 different bowls here because it's just how I have to do it, based on the size of all my containers and everything. So I do 1 batch makes 2 loaves and the other batch is a double batch. So it makes 4 loaves. I have this recipe already on my channel, so I will link it down in the video's description. And I think I have it on my rouserising.com. So written out for you. I will share that down in the video's description as well. But I'm just going to talk more about method and technique and not so much about measurements or hydration or anything like that, because I go based off of feel. And yes, I am measuring with my kitchen scale. You want to make sure all of your basic measurements are precise. And then as the dough forms and as the dough ferments, I'm going to spend more time talking about the fermentation process, what the dough looks like and what the dough feels like throughout the 24-hour fermentation process. So I have covered both of my leavens and stuck them back on the counter. This is the area above my dishwasher. So when my dishwasher runs overnight, it warms up this countertop just enough. Our house is 67 degrees, and this countertop warms up enough to get my leaven active and fermenting overnight. This next bowl that I am serving up the sourdough starter into is going to be for sourdough English muffins. This is one of my favorite sourdough recipes to prep because it's one of the quickest. And what I mean by that is I can make this tonight, and then first thing in the morning, I can make my sourdough English muffins, and then I have them. So if I need sandwiches for the kids, or if I need a breakfast or whatever, this is a quicker recipe than sourdough bread for me. What I'm doing right here in this jar is mixing up my starter. So I've added 75 grams of flour, 75 grams of water to my assuming 75 grams of starter. So I just do everything in equal parts. That's how I personally maintain my starter. I'm sure you're going to have like those sourdough gurus out there who tell you this is how you have to do it. This is the hydration percentage you have to maintain. XYZ. I've gotten to the point after it's been over 7 years of making sourdough, and I probably could have gotten by on feel many, many years ago with making sourdough, but I still continue to measure. But when I do my starter, And when I make these sourdough English muffins, I get it to a certain consistency now, and I don't measure it. And when it's a consistency that feels right to me, I let it go. So you can see right here, I have this bowl on the scale, but I'm not actually measuring the flour because, to be honest with you, I cannot remember this recipe off the top of my head. I'm going to have to refer you to the link in the video's description. But it's awesome that I'm to the point now making these sourdough English muffins that I can just throw the ingredients in the bowl, and even the next morning when I add the ingredients in the morning, I don't measure them. I just have a feel for how much ingredients to add, and then it's just a quick process for me that way. I'm also going to wrap this bowl with saran wrap and leave it sitting out here on the counter. So for time reference, it's about 7 p.m., maybe 7:30 p.m. I always do this just before we get everybody ready for bed. It's one of the last things I do before I settle down for the evening. So right here, I am adding Redmond's real salt. So I'm doing about 1.5 teaspoons to this batch. And then I'm also going to do about 2 tablespoons of honey. And I'm using the squirt honey because it's just easy and convenient for this, and I can get it evenly distributed around the dough, because what you're going to see in just a little bit is how tough this dough is to mix up. So there I'm going in with 2 teaspoons, I think, of baking soda in this recipe. Again, you're going to have to refer to the video or the link in the video's description for the exact recipe for this. Okay, then what we're going to start doing is given this a mix, and I like to use my dough whisk for this. It is a sturdy wire whisk, and it really makes simple work of this type of dough. So I have to mash it and cut it and knead it. You can use your hands if you want to. I'm not going to use my hands for this. I just prefer to keep my hands out of the doughs as much as I can, because then I have to wash my hands, and I've got kind of a water allergy. I get really bad eczema and blisters on my hands from having my hands in the water. So if you suffer from that too, get yourself a dough whisk, use your KitchenAid mixer, do what you have to do to protect your hands. You can also wear food grade gloves, whatever you want to do. I'm just using this dough whisk and really just pounding this dough and swirling it and getting it all mixed up, because it's tough to do for sure. It's worth it though, because once you dollop the dough onto the pans, it kind of expands just a little bit outward, and then they puff up, and when you flip them over, they make that perfectly flat on both sides English muffin with that rim around the outside of softness, I guess you call it, but you know, they're very classical English muffin shape and look to them. So I'm using both my skillet on my double burner and my cast iron griddle, or my skillet was on the single burner and then my double burner for my skillet there. Did I call it a skittle? Forgive me. It's been a week, y'all. All right, so next up we are going to start the actual sourdough bread dough. And this is much later in that day, so I made those sourdough English muffins. And then this is what I want to share with you guys about misconceptions about sourdough. I'm not sticking to a strict timeline. This is probably 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I've really neglected my sourdough. I used to have my sourdough made in the mornings. It was always made by 8 o'clock in the morning. These days that doesn't happen. So my sourdough leaven sits on the countertop. It just kind of chills there until I can get to it. And then what I do is I make I'm just going to show you guys here mostly my single batch of dough. I'm not going to bore you with the making of the double batch of dough and everything. We're just going to go through the single batch. I can give you the measurements because I remember the measurements of my sourdough bread. I've got them ingrained and chiseled in my brain. So I'm starting out with 700 grams of flour. And then we take that flour and I'm going to set it aside here in my KitchenAid mixer. And the next thing I'm going to be doing is mixing the water into my leaven. So for that, I measure out 475 grams of water into the leaven that I made last night. And I want you guys to pay special attention to the leaven batter, the mixture. It is floating on top of my water. If my leaven were stuck down at the bottom, I would not proceed to make sourdough bread today, because that means that my leaven is not active It's not going to ferment the dough. It is not going to make the dough rise. But as you can see there, and I'll show you with my next batch, just because this is such an important part of sourdough making, your leaven has to float on top of the water. That proves that there is enough gas in your leaven. There's enough bubbles in it that it is active and bubbly and happy, and you are going to be able to make a sourdough with that. So I just mix it up in my mixer. We get a very rough, shaggy dough. We do not overmix. We are not kneading. Some people will say they do all their kneading at this time. I do not. And also pay special attention. I have not added all the water, nor have I added salt to this. I set aside some of the water. So I set aside 25 grams of water because we were supposed to originally use 500 grams of water, but you set aside 25 grams. That's why I said 475. And in that 25 grams of water, we're mixing in salt, and we're letting that salt dissolve while our shaggy dough here, you can see the KitchenAid mixer didn't do the best job, so I'm mixing in and incorporating the last bit of flour that's on the bottom of the bowl loose. I just want to make sure that most of the flour is touching some wet dough, because I'm going to allow this dough to sit in this bowl and rest for 30 minutes, because I'm going to make my next batch of dough in the KitchenAid mixer. So this is going to sit here on my countertop covered. Sometimes you guys have seen me use wet towels, but for the sake of variety and to show you how forgiving sourdough is, I'm putting one of these saran wrap bowl covers over this one, and I'm going to use saran wrap on the other ones. I like to use wet towels because it saves me on the plastic use, but a subscriber had commented that somebody uses saran wrap and that keeps their dough more moist versus the wet towel. So I thought, just for demonstration's sake, I would share that with you all. Okay, now look at how well this leaven is floating on top of this water. So it's no longer really floating, but you can see as I mix it, all the bubbles that are frothing up from this leaven. Now that it's all mixed in there, it's sunk to the bottom because I knocked all the air out of it. This is the salt that I was telling you about. I have 25 grams of water in here, and then a tablespoon of salt, which is about 20 grams of Redmond's real salt. We let that sit, and it's not going to completely dissolve. There's still going to be salt granules in the salt. That is okay. After 30 minutes, we're going to swirl that and dump it on top of our dough. Then we're going to proceed to squish the salt water into the dough. Now that was to give the dough 30 minutes of autolays. That was to wake up all the fermentation bugs that are in the dough, and just to let it kind of rest and relax. And now we're adding the salt and that extra bit of hydration to the dough. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to squish it in really well. I'm going to massage this dough. And once I feel like I have it massaged well enough, evenly throughout, then I am going to cover this with my plastic saran wrap again and let it rest for 30 minutes. I'm going to come back to it after 30 minutes, and this is when we're going to do our first stretch and fold. I'm going to stretch and fold this a bunch right now because I'm going to let it sit on my counter, and then I'm going to refrigerate it for a bulk fermentation because I don't have time to deal with this anymore today, and I need to slow down the fermentation. So I am going to ferment it or refrigerate it to slow it down. And when I refrigerate it, I'm going to wrap it up and all that stuff. But I'm just showing you how I'm doing the stretch and fold now. You turn your bowl a quarter turn, you pick up the dough, you stretch it out, you fold it over, you turn your bowl a quarter turn. You see me mashing the dough down really well. And the reason why I do that is to get rid of any large air bubbles. I don't like large pockets of air in my bread because food falls through it, jelly falls through it. It makes a mess all over my kids. I like a tighter crumb at this season in life. So I always pound out those large air bubbles. I want a nice tight crumb. So this is going to sit here and rest for a little while. And then I also tended my double batch of dough. These go in the refrigerator overnight, and then what I want to show you right now is before they go in the refrigerator, this is what the fermentation looks like. You can see a lot of dense dough there. You can see a couple giant air pockets from stretching and folding, but you're not seeing any small bubbles yet. And the small bubbles are really important, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Right now, we are making the kids the next morning, so that bread dough went into the refrigerator. The next morning we wake up and we're making breakfast. So we're using those sourdough English muffins we made yesterday. And then we're serving up with the homemade mayonnaise that I made with you all my last video. And then we're putting eggs on top and we're having that delicious melon. So Aaron was getting breakfast whipped up after he made breakfast. The kitchen was all mine. I had my space back. And now check out this dough. This dough has been in a slow fermentation in the refrigerator for about 18 hours now. So it was overnight, it was through the morning, and now here we are in the afternoon. So I punched down all of those giant air pockets in there, and now I am going to proceed my stretch and fold. On my original recipe on this channel, I told you all we do 6 sessions of stretching and folds. So you do 1 session every half hour, and it's over a period of 2.5 hours. Now that was if I was going to do this dough all in one day. I'm showing you right here how kind of fluffy and marshmallowy my dough has gotten from fermenting all night long in the refrigerator. You can see it's just like really soft and plush. It's kind of like memory foam or something. It gives back when I press into it. So I'm going to set that aside and let it rest for the next 30 minutes. And then I want to show you this bowl of dough. This is my larger bowl. You can see all the really teeny tiny fermentation bubbles, all those tiny, delicate, wonderful bubbles that are telling me that the natural yeast is working in the bread. Fermentation is happening. There's those big bubbles from the stretch and folds yesterday, but the nice, even distribution of all those tiny air pockets is what we need to see visibly and feel physically in our dough to know that our dough has fermented, to know that it's got rise, to know that there's gas in those air pockets that are going to burst in the oven, or they're going to open up, they're going to expand and give you that beautiful crumb. So this is that second batch of dough. This is the one that makes 4 loaves, and I'm just pounding this dough down into my bowl and doing my stretch and folds again the same way as before. And then I'm going to cover this, and I'm probably going to let this sit for closer to an hour because my dough is currently cold. And so I want it to get to room temperature so that the sourdough starter, the yeast, the natural yeast in the bread start to get more active again to kind of speed up my fermentation, because this is the day that I am going to divide up my dough into different little boules of bread, and then I'm going to refrigerate it. Most of it, we're going to refrigerate 4 loaves overnight again, because I want to demonstrate to you all that this dough will stay in the refrigerator and stay good to be baked for a few days on end. But I'm also going to show you what this dough does when I bake it tonight in bread loaf pans. So I definitely do need to bake bread dough this evening of this particular day because I need bread for the following day for my kids' school lunches. So there I am, just pressing down the dough, making sure that it's laminating to itself really well. We want to use lots of pressure, and then we're going to cover it up again and just let it rest on this countertop. After about an hour's rest, and you can do a half hour, you can do an hour, just pay attention to your dough. What you want to start to see is like this webby, fluffy, soft fermentation, all these bubbles. Like you can see now, look at all of this fermentation that's happening to this dough. This is what you want, this light, fluffy, lots of bubbles, lots of fermentation. That's very important. That is what is going to keep your dough from being dense. I've had some of you write me in emails and ask me in questions on my channel. You keep getting flat puck sourdough. And my question is, are you getting enough air? Are you getting enough fermentation in your dough? And does it look like this? Okay, you all saw I didn't do a full 6 stretch and folds, but I want you to see this fermentation of this dough. This is when you know your dough is ready to be divided up and your dough is ready to, getting closer to being ready to bake. So I'm just going to divide this dough up here into 2 portions, and those 2 portions are going to turn into 2 loaves of bread. If you are the measuring type and you want to plop this on a scale and make sure they're both the same size, you can do that. They should be around 705 to 710 grams each. I'm not doing that. I just go based off of look because I'm not selling this bread, so making sure that it is measured appropriately is not important to me for this batch of bread. What I'm doing now is sliding the bread across the surface of the table to create tension and to bring the bread together in a uniform, round, dome-like shape. How you do that is just by sliding the bread across the bread surface, and I'm going to show you multiple techniques to do so throughout the next few minutes of this video. So if you are needing to figure out how to put tension into your loaves, this is how you can do it with your bench knife. You just go around each side of the dough and push the dough across the table, and that tucks the dough underneath and creates tension. I noticed that there was way too many large bubbles in my dough, so right there I'm just pounding out those large bubbles that I do not want, and then I am recreating my tension again. So that is one way to keep a uniform dough. This is the other batch of dough, and I just wanted to demonstrate again. Look at all these amazing bubbles in the bottom of the bowl. If your dough does not look like this, then your dough is probably not going to get an oven spring. It's probably not going to rise up when you throw it in the heat. So see how marshmallowy and voluminous this dough is. And I'm pushing it down. I'm pounding out those air bubbles. I'm being rough with it because that's what you have to do to get those air bubbles to re-laminate within the dough and make smaller bubbles. That's what we're doing here. So you can see I'm just trying to pop some of those large air pockets of trapped gas. What that is from is the little microbes that are in your dough are eating, and they're passing gas. Don't think too much about that. It's not really as gross as it sounds, but that is actually what is happening. So this is going to get divided into 4. Now pay attention to the pillowy, soft memory foam goodness of this dough. This is all natural fermentation, no commercial yeast used. This is just fermented, and it's going to be easier for us to digest. It's going to have that wonderful sourdough flavor, and it's going to have a beautiful crumb that's going to keep it from being a dense hockey puck. So I'm going to show you a few more times how to slide this and make tension with my bench knife. I'm going to give you a little bit more up close, and then I'm going to go around and show you how I do this with my hands, because sometimes it's just easier to get your hands involved. However, I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to keep my hands out of the sticky dough because if I'm in the water too much, it causes my hands issues. So I was just hesitant to form all my dough by hand, but now that I have them in this nice shape and it's not so sticky, I'm showing you how I pull the dough towards myself and rotate a quarter of a turn every time. And that is another way that you can create tension. So I'm just going around each loaf and doing this, and after I do this, you're going to want to let your sourdough rest again for another 30 minutes before you do your final shaping. So this is another time where I covered up the dough with my wet towel and I walked away and I lost track of time, and I came back an hour later and finished up the dough process. My house is 67 degrees. That temperature allows me to do that. If this were the middle of summertime, well, first of all, I don't bake in summertime because we don't have air conditioning. Second of all, it heats the house up way too hot. And third of all, I use my bread machine in the summer, and I can set that out in the garage, and it does not add extra heat to my home. So a lot of times in summers, you will see me take a break from sourdough baking. I can make sourdough in my bread oven. I have shared that with you before in my bread machine. It's a great recipe. It just requires a little bit more tending to than a commercially yeasted loaf of bread in the bread machine, but that's okay. It's another way that you can make sourdough in the summertime without heating up your bread. So like I said, this gets covered for 30 minutes to an hour, hour and a half. And it's fine. It's totally fine. I come back to it and I've got my flour sifter ready, and we are going to put a little bit of dust, just a little bit. I don't want to overflour these, but I'm just going to dust the top enough to keep it from sticking to the table so that I can then do my final shaping. I want to make sure I'm keeping all the rest of the dough covered so that it's not drying out. And then I'm putting a light dusting in my baskets, and I like to use linen-lined baskets or fabric-lined baskets. I prefer cotton. And I line them with this cut-up tapestry, cotton tapestry, and then I sprinkle that with flour, because the baskets that I'm using are plastic restaurant baskets and they're just not ideal. The dough would definitely probably stick to them, so the natural fibers help prevent the dough from sticking to the basket. And if my dough was more loose, or if I use like an all-white flour and I had a higher hydration in my dough, wrapping the dough keeps it from flattening out. So sometimes if you have an overly hydrated dough, or if you use all-white flour in the same hydration as this recipe, your dough will be more loose, more fluid, and wrapping it with the cloth helps keep its shape, and then chilling it helps keep its shape, and then when you pop it in your hot Dutch oven, it has an amazing oven spring. It turns out really well. So this is what I have found that works for me. I know that other sourdough bread bakers, I've watched them all, you all. I've been watching YouTube sourdough videos my whole sourdough existence, right? And I've seen what everybody does and what works for them. And I think that's great because we all find a routine. I definitely don't expect you to do the same sourdough routine as me. Every video of mine that you watch where I make sourdough, I do it slightly different, and that's because of life, first of all. And second of all, just to demonstrate to you all that you don't have to be so strict with it, and that it is generally a forgiving dough, whereas like a quick yeast or a quick rise dough, that you have to be really, really, really like on your business with, right? Otherwise, you're going to overprove your dough really quickly, and that can happen with sourdough too. It's just, it doesn't happen as fast because sourdough is a slower fermentation process than your active, quick yeasts, commercial yeasts from the store. So for this bread, I'm doing an experiment here, y'all. It's been years since I've baked sourdough in one of these bread pans. So I tri-folded it and then tri-folded again, probably overkill. And now I'm going to mash it down into this pan as hard as I can to make its shape and fit the pan a little bit better. These 2 pans of sourdough are going to sit on my countertop for the next couple hours, and they're going to rise a little bit. And then I'm just going to go ahead and bake them because, like I mentioned earlier, I need bread for tomorrow. So I'm just wrapping them with some saran wrap to trap in the moisture. Like I said, this video, I'm foregoing my typical wet towels, and just to demonstrate that it really doesn't matter that much. I know a lot of people get really hung up on specifics. They want to know exactly how long I do things and the exact hydration and the exact everything. And you can watch Lisa on Farmhouse on Boone, and her method is way different than mine. What she does with her sourdough is different than me, and that works for her where she lives at sea level in Missouri or wherever she lives. It does not work the same for me here at 4,500 feet above sea level. Maybe the dry desert, I'm not sure, but for whatever reason, maybe it's culture. I don't know. We do it differently. I learned from a variety of people, and I watched more than one person make sourdough, and then I gleaned from all of them their different techniques and formed my own, what worked for me, what produced the best sourdough for me, and that's what I do. I know when my dough is ready, and you are going to learn the same thing too. If you are intimidated by sourdough, the only way you're going to get better at making sourdough is by making sourdough. I had hockey pucks the first 2 years I made sourdough, and I was so proud of those hockey pucks. I had no idea that I was failing miserably. Nobody told me. Everybody thought my bread was great. They all raved over it. People actually bought my bread, my hockey puck bread. But now I have figured it out. It just took me a really long time. I didn't have anybody showing me right in front of my face. You know, I was just reading blogs and watching videos and trying to figure it out all on my own. I didn't learn from any hands-on experience. So I have faith that if this is a medium in the kitchen that you want to work with, that you want to tackle, that you too can do it. And hopefully you don't end up with hockey pucks for 2 years. I'm going to say I have taught people how to make sourdough, and their first loaves were successful. And I was like, how did you do that? I struggled for 2 years to make a loaf that beautiful. You did it your first try. So
Anyways, anything is possible, you all. I'm just over here floundering as I figure life out. So we score the sourdough so that it doesn't split and tear. You want to score it so that it gives it a place to rise and expand. If you don't score it, it won't rise. It won't have that oven spring. It'll be impeded by the skin layer of dough. So you have to score that skin layer and make sure that you're making your scores deep enough. So those went into a 500-degree preheated oven for 15 minutes, and then I turned the heat down to 425 and cooked them for about 10 more minutes, and then I opened up the oven. I'm going to peel off the foil, and then we're going to cook them for about 5 to 10 more minutes just to get the tops, like they're a little damp from the steaming. So just to brown up the tops, crisp up the tops a little bit, that's what we're doing here. Putting those right back in. They sprung up beautifully, but I am removing that rack just in case they spring up anymore. I don't want them to stick to that. So after those 5 to 10 minutes, I am going to take these out of the oven. I am going to dump them out of the tray and let them cool on my cooling rack for the rest of the evening. And then right before I go to bed myself, I'm going to wrap them in a bag and leave them sitting out on the counter. So these turned out really good. They actually doubled in size from what they were. And because these are just a longer, more different shape, they just look different than the traditional boule. But we are going to be able to cut into these, and I'm going to show you the crumb in just a minute. I typically like to wait for them to cool off a little bit before I slice into them, but for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to go ahead and rip one open and show you the beautiful crumb that is on the inside so that you can see. And this particular one, it does have a few big holes in it, but when you cut the bread on a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch slices, those holes actually aren't that bad. So you can see there's one right there. I'm like, oh, jelly will fall through that. But all the other holes in the crumb are uniform. All right, now we're going to move on to breakfast the following morning. And this is a new breakfast for us. This is Amaranth. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Amaranth. It is an ancient grain, and this is my first time actually cooking with it. I bought it a few months ago from Azure Standard, and now's the time for me to start learning how to use it. So on the bag, I read that it is an excellent addition to other grains, like maybe adding it to your cooked barley or maybe adding it to your cooked oatmeal. And I figure out why once I give this a try, once it is completely cooked. But what you do is you throw 1 cup of amaranth into a pot with 3 cups of boiling water, and then you turn it down to a simmer and you let it simmer for 25 minutes. I have added some salt to it just to season it up a little bit. You just want to make sure that you stir it occasionally, but I also went ahead and made a backup pot of oatmeal just in case we don't like the amaranth as much. And this is what it looks like once it is all cooked. It starts to congeal as it cools, so you do need to keep stirring it to keep it from congealing, or serve it up immediately. And then here it says you can, it goes well with buckwheat and millet and brown rice. So I think next time what I'm going to do is I'm going to start cooking this, and then the last 5 minutes I'm going to add my rolled oats to it so that we have like an oatmeal amaranth based cereal. And then this is that lovely coconut creamer that I made with you guys in my last video. It has collagen, coconut cream powder, and coconut palm sugar. And then I used my little whiskey thing to whisk it up all nice and frothy in my morning cup of coffee, and it's just absolutely delicious. And then later on this day, I decided to bake 2 of the loaves of sourdough. So I'm going to bake 2 today. And just for the sake of showing y'all that sourdough is even good on the 4th day, I baked sourdough on the following day as well. But today I'm baking these 2 loaves, and then one of them is going to go to a lady that just gave birth to her 7th baby. Congratulations to that family. So we're just going to get one of these
baked up for them, and I'm going to try to make it as pretty as I can with my scoring. There are lots of scoring videos online. I'm not very creative when it comes to scoring, but I do like to try to make pretty designs in my bread. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Like that time I tried to do Sasquatch. He didn't really come out that great, but it's okay. You can find some beautiful sourdough scoring pictures online to get some inspiration, but my basic is just one big slash, and then I'll either do some wheat or I'll do like some leaves or something like that. Sometimes I like to do a snowflake, and I have a really pretty picture of a snowflake loaf of sourdough on my Instagram that turned out really pretty one winter. And so this one I'm just trying to figure out, I'm like, what am I going to do? So I make my big slash on the side, and then I'm going to do some little wispy wheat scores to make it look like wheat, but it didn't turn out that pretty. But I just wanted to share this part with you guys so you can see that you don't have to be strict with how you score it. Get creative, have fun, and the only way you're going to learn how to score your sourdough in a fun way is if you try. And sometimes you're going to fail, and that's okay. It still tastes great, it's still delicious, and it's still going to nourish yourself and your family. So don't give up and keep up the hard work. It's so rewarding. These two bowls are going in preheated Dutch ovens. They are 500 degrees Fahrenheit, and they're going in there for 15 minutes. And then we do 425 for 10 minutes with the lids on. Then we take the lids off and 5 to 10 minutes to brown them and firm up the crust a little bit. So once those are done, I just take them out and let them cool on the cooling rack. And I think they turned out pretty pretty. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Are you going to try sourdough? I've toyed with the idea of making sourdough starter and turning it into powder and selling it, but I haven't dove into that yet. I don't know. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Would you all be interested in acquiring some Rouse Rising sourdough starter so that you can make your own sourdough bread? I'm just gauging interest here if I should do it. And if so, I might start doing that, you all. But these are these beautiful loaves. I'm just trying to get them right in the light so that I can get a picture from them. All right, now we're moving on to the next meal. And for this meal, I am looking in my pantry closet, and I'm going to find some barbecue sauce because I'm making wings in my air fryer. So I just have a bunch of chicken wings that I put in the air fryer on the wing feature, and it cooks them right up. And this is a dinner for the kids. So I'm going to throw a little bit of this roux barbecue sauce into a bowl, and I'm going to coat these chicken wings in barbecue sauce for the kids. And then we're going to serve this up with some veggies on the side and give them a nice nourishing meal and fill these bellies. Aaron is helping me get dinner ready. Oftentimes one of us will work on mine and his food, and the other one of us will work on the kids' food. And like I said, we're just trying to give our kids a variety of foods. We do have one child that has an intolerance, and while I was doing the voiceover for this video, she had an allergic reaction to an avocado. Now, avocados were on her allergy test list, but she has been able to eat them for years without issue. In fact, she ate one yesterday without issue, and today she was eating some avocado and her lips started to swell. So it just goes to show you all, sometimes foods are safe for us for a period of time, and then our body says, hey, I've had enough of this. And for whatever reason, our body rejects the very foods that we have enjoyed for so much of our life. And that is the story of my life. Now I cannot eat things like this corn that's in this mixed vegetables, but my kids still enjoy things like this, but Aaron and I cannot. So we are buttering up these vegetables for the kiddos, and this is what they requested tonight, and they gobbled up all the veggies. Butter, fat of some sort, and salt. That is the key to getting your kids to eat vegetables. Lots of butter or some kind of fat. You can throw lard on them, coconut oil, whatever it is, but fat and salt and sugar. That's the key to cooking, y'all. Those three basic flavors, salt and fat, are going to give you that nice, what do they say? They say umami flavor, but you know, that's just like that depth of flavor that the vegetables lack on their own. And one of our kids really enjoys these, and she volunteers to eat everybody's vegetables, but we try to get everybody to eat their vegetables, and they do a pretty good job when we serve them this way. We're also giving them a side of sourdough, and you guessed it right, with lots of butter for their growth and their brain development. We don't go light on the fats around here, and we use real whole food fats. We don't use overly processed seed oils or anything like that. We try to stay away from those because they cause so much inflammation. So I hope you guys learned something from this video today. I hope you got some sort of inspiration. I really enjoyed sharing with you some of the meals that we ate. I apologize this week. I've been really under the weather. I shared a little bit about that in my Motherhood Mondays live with you all, but I am still battling some kind of cold flu bug even as I'm voicing over this. And yeah, it's been a week for me, so Erin's been the one that's been in the kitchen mostly, taking care of most of the meals, and I haven't done much filming, so I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye!